All right, okay, sounds like I'm good with the mic. Excellent, excellent. My name is Asia Atwood, and I'm a co-founder of Trella Technologies. We are an agricultural technology startup located right here in Massachusetts, and I have to say, I'm extremely excited about being here today and about the opportunities that are ahead of us. If you're looking to get active in this industry, I hope to inspire you to do so. Yes, please. Thank you. So I wanted to share a little bit about myself before I got into it, my perspective. As a mechanical engineer graduating from Northeastern University, I started my career as an engineer consultant and then got into entrepreneurship back in around 2011 or so. And at the same time, I got really health conscious and started to figure out other holistic alternatives for some things that I was dealing with personally, and learned about the medicinal value of the cannabis plant and also about how to grow it. And as an engineer and as a medicinal patient, I'm looking at this, I'm trying to figure out, how do I fit? Where do I fit into this industry? And it took me a couple of years to figure it out. But now I'm having the time of my life working with our team at Trella. We design innovative solutions to help experienced cultivators maintain their competitive edge. One of the other things that I learned while going through this journey was that you have to be an advocate. You need to be involved. And we need to make sure that we include, this plant has had a lot of negative history, and we need to make sure that we include space for everyone, equity and inclusion, to make sure that anybody who wants to be involved in this, wants to put in the hard work, has the opportunity to do so. So to get into the cannabis industry a little bit, we all know that there's a lot of revenue and a lot of money to be made in this space, which is great, which means that there's investment capital that's starting to flood in. And I like to call that financial momentum. And we also have a lot of problems that are surfacing that need to be fixed. So what we now have is this kind of great new world where we've got financial momentum, we've got new problems that need to be solved. That creates a lot of opportunity for us to create solutions we never thought of before. With that financial support, we can really dig into research and develop things that we've never even seen before, and I'm extremely excited about it. My co-founder and I wish that we could clone ourselves to do it all, but there's lots of opportunity for everybody else to be involved. Another thing that we need to consider about this industry is that the things that we develop in cannabis has the capacity to reach out and to get into other industries as well. For example, LED technology. A couple of years ago, LED lights were, you didn't want them. Now that we have energy efficiency that we need to deal with, we've got a cannabis market that needs to be fueled. Right now, all that financial momentum and the need has pushed the LED technology to another level. And lights are much better than they were a couple of years ago, and they're getting even better as we move on. So when it comes to technology, there are a lot of other opportunities as well outside of just, lights, LED lighting. But I'm really just going to focus on production and automation with the limited time that I have. And that really that's really comprised of cultivation, getting yourself from seed to harvest. So what do cultivators normally do? Well, a lot of cultivators are looking for indoor farming solutions, either because it's their preference or it's because that's what the state regulates and mandates. And an indoor cultivator, they're really investing in the following: post-harvest automation, LED lighting, like I just mentioned, climate control, and a lot of them are really investing in farm management systems. We're getting a lot of investment there. And cultivators are very concerned about the cost of production, managing their operations very efficiently, as well as making sure that they increase their yield and keep high quality. So in order to manage your operations efficiently and to reduce the cost of production, you have to look outside of the box and think about different solutions. And a lot of people are going in the vertical farming direction. So by vertical farming, I show a few examples here on the screen. The great thing about vertical farming is the fact that you get to utilize the same footprint and increase your yield without having to go out there and get another building. That's another huge headache. So people are trying to make the most out of what they have. On the left, I show a picture of a conventional rack arrangement for vertical farming. A lot of people are going in this direction. There are some alternatives as well. But one of the issues, one of the things I want you to notice with the picture on the left is the fact that you have short plants that have to fit in that tight space. And when you grow a plant short, you inherently, or you reduce the yield per plant. You're lowering the yield per plant because you're not letting the plant grow big, which means you need to grow a ton of plants. Now that's not a problem unless you're in a state where plant count is an issue, or if you're working with people who are trying to reduce waste. Another thing with some vertical farming solutions is some of them have unique arrangements where, as a cultivator, you may use their lights, use their hydroponic grow media, or aeroponics as well. But there are a lot of varieties. One thing won't work for one person, so it's great that we have a lot of variety out there in the market. And vertical farming, in my opinion, has a lot of strength because of the fact that you can utilize your space more efficiently. But there are some limitations when it comes to vertical farming. It's not really, most setups, conventional setups especially, are not designed for tall plants. They're not designed for tall sativa plants. Cannabis comes typically in 3 strains. You'll get either a sativa, an indica, or a hybrid. Sativas grow very tall. Indicas grow very short. So a lot of vertical farmers are having to stick with indica or indica hybrids, which is okay. But I did some research a little bit earlier this year to figure out what were the top strains that people want. And about 50% of the top strains are sativa strains. So if you're a cultivator looking to feed that market and you don't have access to, you don't have the ability to grow a tall sativa, you may be stuck. The other thing to consider is that some of the more unique arrangements may create a situation where the cultivator has to modify their growing method. They may have to change from soil to hydroponic, et cetera, and that can be a put-off for some vertical farmers. So that's where Trello comes in. Our solution is designed to avoid those limitations. We're designing a device that will automatically train a tall plant to grow in a short space. Our patent-pending design will allow a cultivator to grow a sativa plant in a vertical farming arrangement. So you still get the benefit of increasing your yield. Another thing that our design will do is it will make the most out of one plant. So if you're dealing with an issue with a plant count or you're trying to reduce waste, our design makes the most, try to get the most out of one plant. Another thing is that we leave the environment up to the grower, the cultivator. They can use their lights, they can use their grow media, soil, whatever you want. We just control the plant. Cultivator controls the environment, Trello controls the plant. So I have to cut it short. I don't have a lot of time. I think we were only supposed to stick to 5 minutes, my apologies. But I'm on my last slide, and I wanted to just remind everybody that's looking to get involved in this industry that it's very important that you get involved. Get out in the community, talk to people that are actually doing this. We just finished doing a target market feedback session where we showed our beta unit and some of our videos and photography of our current grow to get some feedback, and we're going to take that feedback and tweak our design a little bit. It's also important to become an advocate, as I said, so either become an advocate or to support advocacy. We support the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council. They do excellent work. They keep me in the know when I'm not able to stay on top of policies and regulations. And when it comes to strategic partnerships, that's also key. You need to make sure that you're developing great relationships with people in the community. We've been working with Women Grow Boston, but now under the name of Elevate New England. And I've developed a lot of great relationships, and that's part of the reason why I'm here today is due to that. And we're also working with Hamilton Brook Smith Reynolds, who is a sponsor of this event. They handle our intellectual property. So moving forward, what we're looking for are experienced cultivators that are willing to partner with us for research and development. And we're also preparing for our early stage funding round during the first quarter of 2018. So a lot of things to do, a lot of opportunity for everybody, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session after this and talking to you more intimately during the reception. Thank you very much.
Good job.
So before we jump in, so I didn't have a chance through all my presentation to talk about what the basis of our conversation today is about technology in cannabis. And an important component of that is the research that's starting to happen in the cannabis space, which the federal government, of course, is a big source of friction, but we're finding ways to do the research anyways. So the number of publications, the number of patents that are being filed are increasing dramatically in this space. And here's some interesting work.
Thank you, Vinny. I'm John Della Pera. I am going to talk about 3 big biotech movements that we've seen in plant biotechnology that are ready to really come to full effect in cannabis that I've worked with for a number of years. And First, I'll talk a little bit about myself. So I was raised on a farm in Alabama, but my parents' family came from Mexico, much like Cannabis crossed the border into America about the same time. And here I am, talking about marijuana and how we can use biotech to improve it. But my grandmother taught me about medicinal plants, and that's really where my passion comes from. So from there, I was trained as an engineer, but I also studied ethnobotany, and I became an ethnobotanist, and I've studied medicinal plants used by indigenous people for about 10 years. I've looked at neglected tropical diseases and how people use those plants, not just what plants they use, but how and why they choose them. But then I have done my PhD work in chemistry and in biotech, and what I've come to see is that there are things to learn from both sides of that, and particularly in cannabis. As a result, I have a company of my own, Vine Research and Consulting, and I'm a visiting lecturer at Tufts where I teach about medicinal plants as well. So the first technology I want to talk about is tissue culture. These are not the updated slides, so unfortunately these are the wrong slides, but we'll go through them anyway. So there are many different types of tissue culture, and we do it with medicinal plants is we are able to control the environment. So with cannabis, that's important because they're the development of new phenotypes, so that means the observable characteristics of the plant. For me, that means the chemicals, what chemicals are the plant producing. And the first step to being able to innovate in that space is creating tissue culture. So I've worked with things like the Madagascar periwinkle, which is a plant used for the production of anti-cancer compounds. And I've been able to show that I can increase production in certain of those compounds by using what indigenous people use, which is the environmental cues. So when an insect is when a plant is attacked by insects, for instance, we see a change in the metabolite profile. So for cannabis, we're just starting to get into a space where we can do tissue culture. For horticulture, we've been doing that a long time, and that actually allows us to allows for transportability and things like that. But now we can do cell tissue culture. Cell culture will allow us to do engineering and phenomics, which I'll talk about in a second. So metabolic engineering is what we can do when we have that tissue culture, that cell culture. So first we describe a metabolic network inside the plant. We do a chemical analysis, and from there we have kind of a baseline fingerprint. We can do a flux analysis, which shows us, well, how is that metabolite profile changing? And from there, we can then decide what kind of genetic engineering steps we want to take. In plants, we've seen the production of biopolymers, pharmaceuticals, biofuels, and cannabis is a plant that is ripe for innovation, and some of the work I've done shows that we can actually change and increase the production of compounds. Phenome analysis. So MIT has the Open Ag project. I don't know if anyone here is involved with that, but the MIT Media Lab has been doing phenotyping as well to understand the impacts of global climate change. From what I understand, that's their main desire to understand. But when I do phenomics with the plants that I'm looking at, I'm looking for metabolic changes that are as a result of abiotic and biotic stresses. So that means insects being around or stresses like changes in nutrient levels and things like that. And when we can fully describe and correlate observable differences with the things that we have to use highly expensive instruments to look at, that helps inform the whole industry about how we can choose which plants we want to look at. Okay, so why is this all important? So like I said, tissue culture, developing these tissue and cell cultures are vitally important for cannabis because it gives us scalability. Right now, things like Taxol, which is a potent anti-cancer drug produced from a plant, it's produced in bioreactors, fermenters actually, and we can produce a lot of a compound in a bioreactor. If we can do the same thing with cell culture with cannabis, the potential is limitless for production and for isolation of particular compounds, like certain types of cannabinoids that we might want more of to produce some sort of pharmaceutical. When we talk about biotech and cannabis now, we're often talking about people who are isolating compounds from the plant or producing synthetic versions of the cannabinoids that you might want. In that platform, now we have a fully controllable environment. If we want to try to elicit compounds out of that plant by reproducing some sort of insect attack, We can do that because plants have hormones, endogenous hormones that are produced by the plant themselves, which causes upregulation in certain defense compounds, which a lot of these compounds are, particularly medicinal compounds, are usually, we've seen, are correlated with defense. And then we can do engineering, so we can do metabolic engineering, and we can enhance or change production of certain compounds. These are things that are being done in industrial agriculture right now, but the bar hasn't really been met in cannabis yet. So now when we can do metabolic engineering, it's important because now we can control the genetics of that plant, and we can maximize potential. So I'm not necessarily advocating that we need to have GMO cannabis, but it's where things will go if they're going to meet what industry is doing now with agriculture. And then phenomic analysis. So phenomic analysis really comes down to analytical biochemistry. So the better we can describe that plant, the better we can do to target exactly what we want to change. So why is this novel? So like I said, tissue culture is a standard for R&D in large agricultural production. So I just went to a phenomics conference in Arizona where we had Dow, DuPont, Monsanto, and this is exactly what they're focusing on, is describing the phenome, describing every possible variation of a particular plant so that we can describe exactly how we might want to modify it or how we want to control that environment or select varieties or a genetic modification so that then we can promote that particular one. And metabolic engineering is what I have done with medicinal plants previously, and it's what will be done, I believe, with cannabis as well. So things like I mentioned, Madagascar periwinkle, and opioids from Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy. Now we're understanding the metabolism of that plant, and they can actually transfer those enzymes into yeast and then make the compounds in yeast in big fermenters. And like I mentioned, the phenomic analysis, and the American Society of Plant Biology has prioritized phenomics about 2 years ago. So that means industrial agriculture is following that as well. So how does that shape the cannabis industry? By producing first a reliable cell culture or tissue culture, we can now open the door to all these other steps. I recently published a paper in Trends in Biotechnology. If you're interested about exactly how we can think about indigenous plant knowledge and biotechnology in a field called ethnophytotechnology that blends these things. So now, and really the first step is being able to put that plant into tissue culture and then bring to bear these biotechnological concepts. So a couple examples. So for tissue culture, I have consulted for a few years on cell and tissue culture development for cannabis, improving it so that we can have transportability of clone varieties, so that we can scale up and do all types of things like that. Metabolic engineering, like I mentioned, the Madagascar periwinkle, Taxus species, which is where Taxol comes from. Podophyllum, with podophyllum toxin is another anti-cancer drug. So we've seen all these things done with medicinal plants before. And then phenomic analysis, and I mentioned Open Ag at MIT Media Lab if you're interested, a really interesting project. And I'm collaborating with Brown University now on a phenomics project that takes another plant that has trichomes like cannabis, and because it's easier to look at this plant than cannabis itself, we use another plant that produces a lot of terpenes and has trichomes, and then we can describe that phenome first and do all types of manipulation with hormones and things like that. Okay, so that's the end of my slides. Thank you. If you have any questions about plant biotech, you can direct them to me.
You're up. Now we're going to talk about how to finance some of these activities.
Good evening. My name's Rich, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the financial aspects of operating in the cannabis industry and some of the difficulties in raising capital. I'm obliged to show the lawyer page first, just to make sure that you know I'm not going to give you any specific recommendations or predictions. Okay, my name's Rich. I'm the founding partner at Acris. And for the better part of the past 20 years, I've been working in the financial services industry, in investment management, portfolio management, trading, answering the phone, getting yelled at, you name it. And at this point, it's finally getting fun. I also spent several years as a finance professor. And last year, I became fascinated with the cannabis industry and the opportunity that it presents. And with that in mind, I co-founded a cannabis-focused investment firm named Acris Research and Capital, which raises funds for entrepreneurs in some more innovative ways. So if there's one thing I want you guys to walk away with from me tonight, it's that if you're an entrepreneur or an investor, this industry can be scary, it can be confusing, there's a lot of moving parts, rules are changing all the time, there's a lot of uncertainty in the space. But good businesses are making themselves available in this space that are available to provide guidance, raise capital, invest funds, and make sense of the capital raising process. And they're bringing some creative solutions to the table. Now, one of the most important and difficult aspects of this industry is that there's no access to federally chartered banks. And what that means is that federally chartered banks will not lend to, they won't provide any sort of banking services to, including offering even checking accounts or processing transactions for debit or credit cards. Now, this presents a whole host of difficulties in operating a business, but one that you may not think about is as you try to raise capital, it can be difficult to prove your financial performance when an investor comes to you and says, okay, great, prove to me that you made $200,000 last month, and you show them a piece of note paper with your sources and uses of cash. Without a bank to sort of legitimize it, it can be very difficult. And that's only one of the things that makes the lack of money center banking or anything that's even outside of a savings and loan or a credit union or a state chartered bank very, very difficult. Next is financial gatekeepers can be very apprehensive about this industry. Many just don't get it. Others believe that cannabis is an inherently bad substance. It's a gateway drug without any sort of redeeming qualities. And some believe that the investment risk-reward profile simply isn't compelling. And that can be because of the legal gray area status that it commands, or just because of a lack of proficiency in analyzing these types of companies from using any sort of traditional investment methodology. There's also no real traditional way to go public in the United States, and that also makes valuation very, very difficult in this space. So there are a few traditional ways that entrepreneurs can raise money, although some new and innovative techniques that can sometimes better serve their interests are possibly disrupting, or they are emerging, rather, that sometimes can better serve the interests of those entrepreneurs. So some of the conventional financial solutions are private capital, which is kind of what you need to start with. It's the most common and most prevalent initial source of startup capital. But it can present both financial and relational risks. So loss of investment is bad enough, but ruining Thanksgiving because you blew your parents' money on the wrong extraction equipment can be worse, arguably. Private equity and venture capital can be very valuable options, there's no question. But they can also come with onerous terms, and they can cause the founders to cede control of the company they founded in some situations. As well as it's worth stating that to be eligible to meet with a private equity or venture capital firm, the thresholds can be fairly high. You need to be pretty far along for a PE or VC firm to entertain your pitch. So in the past few years, some companies in California have developed some pretty interesting new legal forms that delay valuation while allowing entrepreneurs to raise institutional quality capital. So for some of you entrepreneurs out there, you may want to explore whether a SAFE or a KISS structure might be right for you and might meet your needs. And the reason I sort of highlight these two is because they were certainly new to me up until very recently, and it's worth investigating at very least. It may or may not be right for you. Next, the loans. So I think we actually, yeah, so this jumped around a little bit, I apologize. So I skipped over convertible notes, but they're interest-paying bonds that have the option to convert to equity at the bearer's discretion, determination. And they offer some pretty compelling investment characteristics, and they're actually pretty prevalent in this space in cannabis, and they obviously exist in sort of more traditional capital markets, but they're more popular in cannabis than they are probably in more traditional industries. And now, jumping back, sorry, loans are becoming more common as the industry matures. There are a lot of benefits to loans. They can be flexible as the creditor and borrowers need them to be, so long as they can agree on the terms and sort of agree on what those terms are going to be that suit both sides. But I always like to say that a bond or a loan is as flexible as the lawyers can make them. And lastly, they also rarely require except in the case of bankruptcy or a default, they rarely require the entrepreneur to cede control of their company. So what's really interesting to me is that these new ways of raising capital are really going to drive the future of this industry. And the reason I say that is because, in my opinion, the winners in this space are really going to be determined by, the first winners anyway, are going to be determined by large capital allocations, meaning that the companies that raise the most money now are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And as clear market leaders emerge, they're going to bring along with them the industry is going to become more transparent, standard business practices as well as analysis methodologies will emerge, and more rigorous due diligence practices are going to become more mainstream. All of these things need to happen as the industry grows up and matures, and once real money starts coming into the space, which we actually started to see about 3 weeks ago, that's only going to accelerate. And these developments are going to encourage the industry to grow up and earn legitimacy, and they're going to create value for all the involved stakeholders. So a well-timed example that ties to these thoughts together also happens to be the most recent transaction that I've worked on. It incorporates, this is different, whoops, different slide too. It incorporates various solutions to raising capital for different purposes and at different stages of the investment of the transaction. So it begins with a convertible note, and then that's stage one, where we're seeking a private investment group. We're raising capital through a private investment group for a convertible note, where stage two is going to be a far more traditional loan from a multinational bank, which we're going to be able to access because of the legal status of cannabis in the form of CBD in the country where this particular opportunity is domiciled. And it actually gets a little bit more complicated because the convertible note comes with a line of credit, and there's an equity, there's a purchase, an American-style equity option with a potential trigger in place halfway through in the event that something goes wrong. So we hope that that doesn't happen. But I realize that was kind of quick. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer any of them. I'll be available at the reception afterwards. And I encourage you to contact me through the contact information listed here. Thanks very much.
Seats up here for you guys in the back. Come on forward.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Let's see if this is up high enough. Okay, great. I'm Chanel Lindsay. First of all, I would like to thank everyone, thank Chris, thank the team for having me here today to talk to you a little bit more about cannabis, technology, the current state of cannabis in Massachusetts, what we can expect here when it comes to innovation, research, and some of the things that I've seen trending as we've moved into implementation here. So a little bit about me. There are kind of two sides to my story. One side is business and one side is policy. I am an attorney here in Massachusetts. I helped write question 4, the initiative that just passed on the ballot, legalizing adult use of cannabis. And I also was a spokesperson for that campaign and recently tapped by the treasurer to be on the advisory board. In fact, just earlier today, we were putting forth recommendations about the new industry and about how to encourage businesses of all sizes to be involved. Also, a specific focus on correcting the harms of prohibition and also ensuring that innovation takes place here and that we in Massachusetts can be the leaders that I know that we can be when it comes to advancing the technology and ending the stigma around cannabis use. On the business side, I developed a technology, a decarboxylating machine. It is a patient technology that allows people, even if they've never used cannabis before, to get more accurate dosing, get more out of their material, and at the end of the day, create any product that they would find in a dispensary at a fraction of the price in their own home. So with Arden, I've grown that company into an international company. We've sold over 8,000 units and are coming out with some other products as well. And in my quick 5 minutes here, I'd just like to go over some of those trends that I've seen. Quickly, we've seen cannabis explode across the country. Here's a map that looked very, very different just 5 years ago, showing everywhere where cannabis is legal. The darker states are showing where we have full legalization, like in Massachusetts. The medium green states are showing where there's medical, and the light green is showing where you have CBD legislation. And so we can see that there are very few places that cannabis has not touched in the United States, and I think we'll see that trend continue. With that comes business opportunity, and we can see right now, or what it was in 2014, and what the expected revenue in 2020 is. And I think that you see with the expansion of adult use, how quickly that number begins to grow. And you can see that in this chart here. And I don't think we should take that to mean that more people are using on a recreational basis. I think that the trend, the overarching point here is that when people have access to cannabis, they begin using a lot more for a lot of various reasons. In Massachusetts, like I mentioned, right now we are right in the middle of determining what this structure will be here in Massachusetts and how people will be part of this industry and what kind of pathways to business there will be. And we know that there will be a move from vertical integration that we've seen with the medical facilities, and those licenses will be broken out into 4 different licenses: cultivation, manufacturing, retail licenses, and testing laboratories. There's also a large push for on-site consumption facilities and also very small business licenses. We saw a huge problem with lack of access to opportunity for small businesses in the medical program. And the idea is to ensure that the industry is providing opportunities for innovation within our state and for people within this state. There's also a huge push for licenses related to research and development and innovation. And there's a large likelihood that there will be research-based licenses. I think that's incredibly important when we're talking about all of the different aspects. There are a couple of things that are on the horizon that provide, I think, unique business opportunity or innovation opportunity, and one of those is social consumption. When you're talking about social consumption, some of the issues that we've been tackling are providing safe environments for both customers and employees. So I think there's an opportunity of innovation when it comes to ventilation, HVAC, heating systems, and the like, especially for small businesses, which is likely where we're going to see these land in Massachusetts. Cannabis delivery is another hot topic. Not only the delivery service platforms themselves, which is a key component, but also the safety concerns around delivery. As we moved from large-scale delivery to small-scale, and we want to lower barriers for small businesses, employing technology will really be key. So technology that is a digital inventory systems, GPS tracking that ties into inventorying and the like, I think will be are great opportunities, and I think that they will fill the need or the requirements that we'll see. If I do have a minute, there was another slide deck to go through. I was asked to talk a little bit about the technology and the development of the device, but I don't see the other slide deck over here, so I'll just briefly go over it. So for me, my journey started about 17 years ago when my son was born and I got an ovarian cyst, and I started using cannabis as a medicine. And at that point, I was using just basic technology that existed in the home, a crock pot or an oven or a toaster oven, and I was making good quality medicine, but I was wasting a lot of it. And there was inconsistency in the dosing. And so when medical marijuana came to Massachusetts, that was over a decade of me using my homespun methods, I got an opportunity to test my medicine at a laboratory that opened up in Framingham. And I think it's really instructive how closely tied policy and innovation in the cannabis space is, because without access to that laboratory to begin testing my medicine, I wouldn't have been able to discover how lacking the current kitchen methods or home methods are with respect to this underlying process of decarboxylation, which is converting or activating the THC and other cannabinoids in the plant. And through that testing and development, I decided that I was going to create a device that would be able to allow people not to waste half of their medicine or not to not be able to get the result that they were looking for. And so I used my background in making this medicine and my skill set as an attorney and bringing a team together, and took my original design and brought together a team of thermal engineering specialists and electronic engineers, and got some financing and brought my product to market. And so now, 3 years later, you know, that experience, both building this business and helping craft the laws around cannabis, led me to know and believe that this is the next big industry here in Massachusetts. And I look forward to with you more about my experiences, hearing your thoughts, frankly, about what I'd like to see here in Massachusetts, because, as I mentioned, we're right in the middle of the drafting process, and it is important for roadblocks people have, or what pathways we need to create in order to see the type of industry that we'd like. And at the end of the day, I would echo Aja's sentiments about the type of groups and people that you need to be surrounding yourself with in this space. Elevate New England, Mass Recreational Consumer Council. I'm also a co-founder of Northeast Cannabis Coalition. We're a trade organization of small businesses, a multidisciplinary group of professionals that are, at this point, about to submit a policy paper to the Northeast Cannabis Coalition. And if we are looking for additional small businesses who are in signing on to this, so we'd be happy to share our recommendations that we have for innovation and encouraging the type of activity that I think everybody in this room can agree on. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with all of you more.
Awesome.
Hello, my name's Russell Lankin, and I'm here from California, so a bit different perspective on the industry, and just, we've been operational almost 20 years now, and it's just a bit more widespread, so a bit more nuanced with our own regulation. Bit about me: I moved to California in 2013 to work in finance. Kind of realized that wasn't my thing, and had an opportunity to get into the cannabis industry. Went to Golden Gateway and was selling prepackaged flower in California at a time when most stores had pounds of weed on the shelf. And we were trying to kind of get that market a bit more sophisticated. That business was a bit too early, but I ended up at Kiva, who's the largest edible and distributor manufacturer in the state. We were distributing a portfolio of 20 brands. I was running LA sales before moving on to start my pre-roll company, Prism. Kiva is now the distributor of Prism, and I've moved back to Kiva to help them start a flower distributor. When I first started in this industry, we didn't have data. most of my clients use notebooks to keep their ledgers. The sophisticated ones had Excel and could give you a somewhat accurate count of inventory. But it was, you were calling and being like, hey, can you count the jars of weed on the shelf so you can tell me if you need a reorder? It was pretty rough. 2016, we saw people start to get POSs. Trees and indica online started to become like pretty preeminent in California. And with that, it created an opportunity for sharing data and actually having insights into what your customers were doing and what patients wanted. 2017 saw the launch of BDS Analytics, which is essentially Nielsen for cannabis. They aggregate from roughly like 200 dispensaries in the state, and you can see item level data and performance across multiple brands, sectors, effect-based products. BDS Analytics was key in me starting my pre-roll company. We're purely CBD based, and seeing the rise in CBD on their platform was like, just confirmed everything we'd anecdotally knew. So going on a bit more, BDS is pretty much the keeper of all the information in California at the moment. People like Trees and Indica really make that possible. Both of those are POS systems that they use seed to sale tracking software, which for California is really the game changer that goes live January 1st. January 2nd, if you're a retailer in California, if you have a bottle of weed on your shelf, you need to be able to say who grew that, where they grew it, when it was harvested, which mother it came from, a lot of the things you're dealing with in Massachusetts, but we haven't dealt with that for 20 years. So it's a lot of people that are not compliant, really needing software to help them figure out how to do this tracking in a somewhat efficient way. That brings us to our challenges. Traditional software providers, at least to the California market, have shunned us completely. Shopify took down my website. Instagram's deleted like 5 accounts with close to 100,000 followers. Twitter, the same thing. Facebook, they took down an advertising budget with like $20,000 in the account. Traditional providers don't want to work with us, and it creates a lot of opportunity for specialized software. Right now, like my company can't do email marketing because there's no email marketer that'll take our money. Moving on to the opportunities, at least in California, the retail value of cannabis space is huge, more so than an Apple store even. My largest volume clients are doing over $100,000 a day in like 2,000 to 3,000 square foot retail settings. With that, understanding users' preferences for products is huge for actually providing them the retail spaces they want. At Kiva, we launched pop-up shops with our 4 best SKUs, and it almost doubled our monthly sales. Just looking at the future, it's all branded products. In Colorado, they were the first people where BDS actually had data, and in the 2 years BDS was live, they saw like a 400% growth in branded products versus, generic cannabis in a jar. That's just going to keep happening. In California, where we've had brands on the market for as long as 10, 15 years, people don't walk into a shop and want cannabis. They want a very specific type of cannabis. They want a brand, they want an edible, they want a tincture. With that, it goes back to the seed to sale tracking at the bottom. So all these different businesses that were self-distributing in the past now need to find a way to get to market and know where their products are and who's paying what for them and how that all works. So hopefully that can come from, really smart technical people. The use case examples I was going to touch on, BDS Analytics I kept speaking about, but they really, looking at the data that they had in Humboldt, which is like one of the best vape pens in California, it's completely effect-based and they sell for twice the price of their closest competitor. We did the same thing with Prism. We launched our line of pre-rolls. We're pretty much double the commodity price of a pre-roll, but we're doing very well based on that marketing. And then lastly, MJ Freeway was a POS that launched in California. They didn't really have the technical development behind them, and after being the standard on the market for like 3 years, they crashed and took half the state's businesses with them. For like a week in 2017, none of my clients could take patients or really run their business because they had no access to their own data. So it's just like a lesson in developing things the right way. And yeah, thanks for having me.
What an interesting mix of speakers. Wow. Good job, Chris. This is really awesome. So we're also live streaming this event, believe it or not. So there's a pile of people that are watching this online and sending in questions. And It's interesting. A lot of the online questions are related to the fact that the federal government, calls cannabis a class 1 substance. And I think, Russ, you just sort of mentioned that the big tech platforms essentially are following that path, that they're just shutting anything down that's related to cannabis. Is that the experience you've had?
It's the experience is basically like someone like Instagram will take your money until you get to call it critical mass, and at the point where you become large enough where you're getting hundreds of thousands of followers, active engagement, you're actually interacting with your audience. It's sort of the point where they're like, whoa, you're too big and you're drug dealing on our platform, and it's not the case. Kiva, who I work for, is one of the most compliant operators in the state. We won't even post our prices on social media because we don't want anybody to misinterpret what it is we're doing and what we're trying to do with it, and it's still...
So this is like real stealth mode.
Yeah, you can only operate on them until they decide to shut you down. There's no real collaboration.
So I'm going to keep asking questions, but if anybody in the audience has questions, stick up your hand, I'll come to you. So Chanel, tell us, what's going to be in the Globe tomorrow? As an advisor to the commission, this is like, it's all happening right now, so.
It's funny, I was wondering that same thing when I was driving here, because I remember when we were presenting this morning, there were a couple of microphones there, but I think that, my biggest takeaway from hearing the recommendations reiterated today is how much of a change we need from the current system that we have, that we need more access, that we need more opportunity, that innovation and research is key, and that we're looking towards the commission to fulfill that need by creating the type of structure that will allow for the kinds of things that we were talking about, craft cooperatives, small business licenses, and that the technology and innovation does exist, and if it needs to be created, we have that available as well.
And you've been involved in this pretty much from the beginning with Proposition 4. So how does Massachusetts compare to other states? We always hear about Colorado sort of being the lead and Washington being in the lead, but are we catching up, or where do we stand?
So I think that the structure that we're looking at, we're not going to catch up until July 1st or the end of sometime in 2019, right, when everyone's really online. But I think that what we're doing and what I'm seeing the commission do is taking the best pieces from the other states and correcting what needs to be corrected. And one of the issues is ensuring that prices stay high for product. That's a big concern for business owners and also for the Department of Revenue as well when we're looking at taxes. So taking a unique approach, and again, I think this ties back to...
You mean collusion? Is that the unique approach?
No, actually, what it is creating pathways for small businesses and craft co-ops to create the kind of experiences where you can have a cannabis sold at a higher price, where people aren't impacted by that.
Right, okay. Just coming to the science for a second. So I think I heard somewhere that there's about 5,000 strains of the plant. By the way, first time I heard that term, ethnobotany, which is very interesting. So how are we ever going to figure out, with all these strains and all the cannabinoids out there and all the terpenes, what biological impact this has? How are we going to unpack this, particularly in a federal government environment that doesn't let us do research?
Yeah, so so I can speak from medicinal plants generally. It's been driven by what's called bioassay-guided fractionation. So you take a plant that has some known use, let's say the Madagascar periwinkle. So that's kind of like the great granddad of how we have done this in the pharmaceutical industry. It will be...
This is the source of Taxol.
It's the source of vincristine and vinblastine, which are used for their anti-cancer compounds. And the only source for these compounds is the plant. There are crude syntheses, but they're not very efficient. So we rely on fields in Africa and India to grow these plants, and then we extract them, and we get this compound at something like 1 gram for every 500 kilograms fresh weight. So what we've done is we look for tissue culture, cell tissue culture. We look for metabolic engineering and these types of ways to answer that question of how do we get more of this thing that we need. For cannabis, it harkens more to the ethnobotany. So ethnobotany is how indigenous people have used the plants around them, and that may be as medicine or as food or as making houses or baskets or whatever. People have used plants since there have been people. We've evolved with plants, and they use the whole plant usually, or some kind of crude extract. And that is how people have used cannabis as well. And cannabis has evolved with people as they selected strains, which we might call a variety in botany. These terms, phenotype, variety, they're all kind of like, they all mean the same thing. So some observable difference in the plant, and they've been evolved with people. So how do we tell what's actually working? Sometimes it's a synergistic effect.
But this doesn't sound scalable.
That's right. So the FDA has just, in the past 10 years, has approved a scheme for botanical drugs. So what that means is you can have an extract that has some complex characteristic. It has some sort of metabolic fingerprint. So there are 2 drugs that have been approved so far that are not single molecule drugs. One is a green tea extract, and one is an extract from it's called crofelemer. It's the sap of a tree.
There's historical evidence that it's safe.
Right. So once we have a history of safe and effective usage, it can be bumped through to clinical trials more quickly. And that is the path, I think, to finding, what metabolic fingerprint of cannabis is the one that is going to be most effective for whatever particular.
So the FDA has provided a loophole for
if you want to
cannabis
call
research.
it a loophole. So this is actually an interesting question because botanical drugs in general historically did not have a path to being approved. It either had to be some sort of single molecule,
Right.
Or you went through the dietary supplement route,
Right.
which is basically the Wild West. It was the Hatch Act, put together by Orrin Hatch.
Right.
He's from Utah, and in Utah, that's where a lot of dietary supplements the companies are headquartered, and they didn't want any regulation. So we wound up having all of these, you hear in the news all the time, dietary supplements with widely varying constituents, and how do we know it's actually working and what isn't? That's because those things aren't really regulated. They don't go through some kind of approval process before they hit the market necessarily. It's kind of a reactionary process, so afterwards we'll look at. But the botanical drug route, which the FDA developed, and in 2016 developed brand new regulations, they updated all the regulations, that's a route to bring an extract or something that may be from cannabis, for instance, to become a pharmaceutical.
That's a great insight. I didn't know about that. So that's really interesting. So that's going to bring me to our patent holder here, Asia. So you've been very secretive about this patent, a way to grow a tall plant in a short space. I mean, tell us how that, what's the patent about?
Well, we're patent pending, so just to clarify. Because
It doesn't matter, but you've
there's a
applied,
significant
so,
difference.
you
Yes,
know.
One of the things when you're trying to develop a device is when do you get to that point where you want to share it with the world because you need feedback on whether or not you're actually designing something that is useful. And there's a nice little balance there that you kind of have to play with. But one of the things that Keith from HBSR has always told me is that you have to make sure that we get the intellectual property solidified first before we can go out and start really communicating it with other people. But now we're at the point where we're able to do that, and you can do that with confidentiality agreements and NDAs.
Right.
But a lot of industries are pretty secretive about their
No, I
technology.
get it, but just at a high level, what's the patent about?
Automatically training a tall plant to grow in a short space.
Oh, you train the tall plant. Wow. Impressive. We got a question back there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Russell a question. So the industry could be segmented. I think your experience with social media.
Yep.
And I wanted to see if you'd be willing to segment the industry and then talk about the level that you reached before social media started to cut Kiva off. And then, so I segment Kiva into a product supplier as
Yep.
opposed to a device supplier.
No, absolutely.
First, I wanted to see if you'd segment it and say, so device company,
So, absolutely. I'd say at the retail level, you're just cut off. The minute Instagram or Twitter or somebody realizes that your whole business is around selling product, and you're not even like just like a marketing company or something else, like you're out. As a product company, it's when you hit a certain scale, or honestly, a lot of it's the image of your brand. At Kiva, we get to a decent following before we get deleted because we're pretty elegant. We're more of a thought leader in the industry as opposed to like women in bikinis and covered in weed. Like that type of messaging definitely gets you deleted quicker.
Wait. Did you say you're a thought leader because you don't do that?
Yeah, it's unbelievable,
Okay.
but like it's by simply using like real business practices and like
Right.
being conscious of who your consumers are and not trying to offend people. Like it'll help a lot on the social platforms. When you get to the ancillary services, it goes back to kind of your message. If you're a responsible ancillary services company, you're a lighting manufacturer, or someone like that, you don't really have issues unless you're, saying use these lights and you'll grow the biggest, best cannabis on the country that you could ship to New York to sell. Like you need to really, like at the device level, be like really pushing the line to get deleted. It's more as like if you're a retailer or a brand that like very clearly touches product, it's much more of an issue. As like the ancillary services don't deal with that nearly as much, especially if your technology can be applied to other things as well.
I saw this hilarious video on a company that's developed a device to let you grow tomatoes in your basement. It's just, has anybody seen that? It's hilarious. You have to go see it.
Yeah, and
so Rich, I mean, there's this, there's always this stigma, as an investor myself in this space, it always goes down to this like Cheech and Chong kind of thing, right? So how do you get past that? And are there any institutional investors who are investing in this space more than once?
You're absolutely right. First of all, some people you're just not going to change their mind. I was thinking about how I was going to get that question today and how I wanted to answer it. And it's kind of how Julian Robertson missed the entire tech boom. You can't change his mind. He didn't get it. He didn't make any money. There's a lot of people that are just that way. You can tell them why it's important, why it's compelling, why it's a good risk-reward trade-off, how you're collateralized and it's a good diversifier for your portfolio, and they say, thanks, I don't like it. Some people you just can't help. There are a lot of people that I think are rational investors, and once someone who speaks their language is able to advocate on behalf of sort of the cannabis industry, can walk into their office without dreadlocks, without a tie-dye t-shirt, and sort of really looking the part and speaking their language and being professional about it and saying to them, look, you have to understand, this isn't the 70s. This isn't Cheech and Chong.
Yeah, you notice they're all wearing blue jackets.
This is a sophisticated.
Any venture capitalists that are investing?
Yeah, there's a lot, but it's private capital for the most part right now.
Not institutional, so no. But there are some venture capitalists. I know a couple that are.
Hold on, I want to separate. So venture capital is still private capital.
Oh, I see.
Private equity is still private capital.
Yeah, as opposed to
there's very little that's exchange traded in the United States. The only way to do it is to uplist with a reverse merger. Then I want to say kind of that doesn't count.
Right.
It exists, but and there's real money in the space. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it's private and it's coming through private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, family offices with a high risk tolerance.
You can't name any names or. People out here are raising money, so.
Yeah, I mean,
they could come to you, but maybe you can name a couple of names.
I can't think of any. I mean, they're out there for sure. I'm sorry, I can't think of like brand name private equity funds that are really out there.
Cannabis space, like Tuator Capitals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Privateer.
Tuatara, ArcView has an interesting model, but they're helping investors meet entrepreneurs. Who are some of there's MedMan.
That's good. Yeah, we got some. We got a question here.
I have a question regarding funding and capital investment for small farmers, especially in places like Northern California. I work for an
I think the short answer to that is no. I don't. This is a big ag game, and little guys are not really going to be able to compete. I mean, there's always going to be the same way you have Budweiser, and then you have the Alchemist. There will be craft guys out there, but not really. I don't think so. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think that there's a lot of space for a sort of a medium-sized, small-time grower, somebody with 3 acres or 5,000 square feet of indoor. They're going to get swallowed.
So I think you were talking about small business, but you're not including small growers in that.
I am, but we're talking about Massachusetts versus California. So in Massachusetts, I think we've seen the need for that, right? In California, I think it's really like you're stuffing a genie back into a bottle, right? You have an unregulated market that has way more people in it active right now than will ever be able to be licensed. And the small growers and the small farmers that are in that have already started that process, right? Because all of the cities and towns have already, the application dates are either just passed or rolling in right now. So it requires, some people are getting through, but it requires that concerted effort and the funding and really a lot of different things coming together to make that happen. And again, that is why, we're focusing on making sure that we do have different pathways for access here as we're building it in Massachusetts. And it is a little bit different because people that are doing it here in Mass are on the unregulated side, where in California, because of 215, there's this idea or feeling that you were legitimate even though, that transition hadn't taken place yet.
All right, lots of hands, so I'm going to get through them all. Let me start with him. Federal force or law. Anybody can take that?
I haven't seen much enforcement like in California, especially at the federal level, in like 2, maybe 3 years. And the asset forfeiture, like you still hear that it's a thing that could happen, but in terms of like my clients that have gone through either BOE audits or federal audits, like no one's really dealt with civil asset forfeiture or anything like that.
I just read in The Economist that there's no tax exemptions for Class 1 drugs. So you can't write off any of your expenses. You got to take all your revenue, and is that what's happening? You get taxed on the revenue and you can't?
My pre-roll company has an adjusted tax rate of probably like 70%, like off. Like we can't deduct anything. You can do some things with like multiple entities to try to like take your core business functions and only pay employees that do those things from the dirty entity, if you will. But the taxes are obscene.
And so this new pass-through thing in the tax reform won't help us?
No,
I don't think so, yeah. Right here.
You mentioned that small growers are being overwhelmed by the big growers in California. Is this like Oxford Dave or somebody's going to be our cannabis provider when we talk about big ag?
I mean, it's the scale. Like with California, you need to think like in Northern California where you're talking about in Mendocino County, this is the first year that anyone could get a 10,000 square foot permit. Last year, the largest you could do was 5,000. The year before that, the largest was 99 plants. So in California now, you have people pulling 250,000 square foot permits all over the state. And to compete at scale as a small farmer is nearly impossible. There are companies that are working to help small farmers aggregate together and centralize processing because, on a pound of sun-grown flower from a small farm, like 25% of your costs are post-harvest processing. So there are things being done to make it easier for them to adjust to lower prices in a regulated economy. But, at the end of the day, if you make $200 a pound and you only produce 100 or 200 pounds a year, when you were used to making $1,000 a pound, it's really hard to adjust your life to those economics.
Commodity market. There was somebody up here. There we go.
Yeah. Yep, I mean, the company that I'm starting right now is having, we're having as much trouble as anybody else, to be honest. We're not plant touching, we're loaning money to entrepreneurs, and it's definitely difficult. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, there's not, yes.
One back there, and I'll come to you.
I have a question about the Mass Cannabis Commission, and I was just wondering what level of openness the meetings have.
Very open. They're very open.
You know?
Yes, so the meetings are all open meetings, public meetings, and actually next week is an entire week of meetings of the commission, and they will be publicly discussing and debating all aspects of the industry, and then figuring out which of those aspects will be distilled into regulations. So all of that is public record, and if you are interested in seeing any of the Cannabis Control Commission or the advisory board meetings, I would definitely urge you to go to the Mass Recreational Consumer Council Facebook page, because they have been live streaming and capturing and saving all of them.
Yeah, that's awesome, right here.
Yeah, so next week they're being held, and they're all posted. The public meeting laws require posting, and if you go on the CCC website, I don't remember the exact website link, but if you just Google Mass Cannabis Commission, it comes up really easy to navigate website, and you can see all the different meetings, where they're located and what time next week that is.
Okay, I have to repeat the questions because the live streams can't hear it. Question. Yeah, so the question is, when's the levee going to break, and all the money's going to start flowing in?
I think about 1 or 2 seconds after it becomes federally legal.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Everybody is already looking at this, and there are some large investment banks that, so Cowen is a New York-based investment bank. They have analysts covering cannabis. They just are only covering it because they can't really do anything else about it. They can't underwrite any transactions. There's nothing to trade. They can't do anything, but believe me, they're watching it. In Canada, it's a little bit more sophisticated. TD, Toronto Dominion, has the same sort of operations, but they have a much wider range of business offerings for those types of companies. So not only just analyst coverage, but they trade, they underwrite. There's another company called Pi Financial, PI, Scotia. Up there, it's far more sophisticated up there from a capital market standpoint than it is in the US. But I really think that there is going to be a lot of interest. I mean, just think about the sheer scale of it. There's no way the banks, I mean, it's kind of, in my opinion, again, it's kind of like the internet in like '97 for these banks.
Well, I can say that biotech companies that I consult for and big pharma, so 36 hours ago I was in New Jersey at one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and I won't name them, but I gave a talk exactly about this, and they're poised for that time. You know, they're getting ready for when it becomes federally legal so that they can do everything they can to implement some of the techniques I talked about and make it scalable so they don't have to rely on even the plants anymore.
So much for states' rights, huh? Let's see. Let's take that gentleman there.
Are there some decent-sized grow operations coming online in New England that need controls and automation help? And if so, how would entities like ourselves connect with them?
Okay, so the question is, are there any decent-sized growers in Massachusetts coming up who need controls and automation? Anybody can answer that?
I'll step to
Asia?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there definitely are. I just met a couple of gentlemen last week that were looking for engineers that they really need to help with their automation. There's a lot of people that are very experienced with growing, but not experienced with the engineering. I would suggest that, as I mentioned, you go out to some of the networking events for cannabis and growers and start talking to them, because they're itching for people to help them be more efficient and more, on the automated scale of things. So there's definitely a need for skills like yours. And if I have a minute just to get back to that small size craft growing thing, I don't want to deflate some of the people that might be interested in sticking towards more of a craft grow. I think one of the things that sometimes people forget is that cannabis works differently for everybody. So a strain that works one way for me will work an entirely different way for you. So we need a lot of variety. And when it comes to larger scales, because you need to control climates for different types of plants, sometimes they're forced to supply more of a general style strain. And there's going to be a lot of need, especially from a medicinal point of view, for specific strains to meet specific demand. So that's where the smaller craft growers will really come into play.
Yeah, so this is kind of where my question was leading. So, in drug discovery, they have, these, 5,000 vials of stuff, and they keep trying things around. So is that where we're going to come to here, where we have thousands of combinations of, what impact it has on biology by the different strains?
I would say that the system isn't set up to do that rapidly. So that's actually a great point, because even something like the botanical drug, you still have, it can't be variety. In fact, so every single one of those has to be approved as a pharmaceutical if it's a different metabolic fingerprint, basically. So there's no, every single one of those would have to go through the same clinical trial process. And while personalized medicine is really booming right now, I think that maybe is the route for it to go, is personalized medicine.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think it's also like with the multiple strains, it's far more relevant to the adult use and recreational market. Like in California, we're seeing people move away from like the indica sativa hybrid thing that's very common in most other states, and moving far more towards like terpene-based effects. And I think in like the more adult use recreational market, people think about different strains more in terms of like flavor profiles than they do in terms of like effect. Like you definitely think your sativa is more your daytime or your indica is more your evening. But even within those categories, people are definitely gravitating towards different strains more in terms of like taste than even necessarily
Is
effect.
this anecdotal, or is this
No, so
some
you can like
evidence being collected here?
So like at the company I used to work for, we were terpene testing every single strain we sold, and like we sold like over 200 strains, and we saw a quicker sell through in the higher terpene percentage. And then within specific terpenes, like I believe it's mycene or I don't know how to pronounce it. Myrcene. That's really popular in some of the more household sativa names. That specific terpene would lead to much higher Southern California sales.
Got it. More questions? Got one right here. Let me repeat the question. So the question is, co-ops and collectives, is that being regulated in Massachusetts or promoted?
So the recommendations that went through the committees, through the subcommittees today, included tier licensing that started at 1,000 square foot a tier. So I think that addresses the need for small craft cooperatives. There are also recommendations that went through that, number one, for the CCC to establish craft cooperatives. One thing that we heard when we were having our listening sessions in our market participation subcommittee was the call from farmers for this. And within the statute in Massachusetts, there's actually a mandate that farmers and businesses of all sizes be included in the industry. So I think that where you have that type of language right in the initiative, we're certainly on our way to seeing that come to fruition. And the other recommendation was that there are many different kinds of co-op structures that were being suggested, and the suggestion or the recommendation from both the industry and market participation subcommittees was that the commission should allow the co-op growers to determine what structure would work for them, so that we could see and the market could see what played out the best as far as the structure went.
So there was a question online about will Colorado companies move into Massachusetts? Yes?
If
They're already here. Like the audience already knows more than the panel.
It's, yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, we're seeing like in California, the largest brands are like Kiva, who I work for. We're probably operational in like 6 states. I'd say probably 12 by like mid next year. Through licensing, we don't actually like own and operate in most of those other markets because it's really difficult too with the nuances. Right. But the bigger brands are all invested in traveling.
Awesome. So, question here.
We've been talking a lot about sort of commercial growing, but I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts or recommendations where to look for kind of that home growing sort of personal use growing, because I don't see a huge amount of information available about that research.
So the question's about homegrown versus commercial. Asia?
Yeah, there's a lot of information.
All basements?
You know, I mean, there's a lot of different devices out there. You know, there's a lot of different devices out there that you can get into, and a lot of information, like you said. It's almost like information overload. But there are some companies that are coming out with more of an automated growing system for a residential style setup, so you can get an automated box that can grow cannabis. I believe the name of it is called Growbox or Grove. Leaf was one. I don't know if they're out in market yet, but there are some people that are trying to take control of that market to help people who don't have the grow experience, that want to grow residentially, but don't really have the time or the knowledge to do so. So there are options. There are also some people who are working a little bit more on a unique scale, where they're actually come to your home and help you set up a grow. So there's some opportunity for that as well.
Yeah, so I think Steve Krasnow is here somewhere in the audience. There's Steve. So he's creating a co-op to do that in your basement. So market information about home growing?
So I think anything related to data from the state, I don't know when we'll see that, but you'll see the rules surrounding home growing coming down the pike soon. That's on schedule right now. But I don't know if there are companies right now that are, I mean, I'm assuming that all these grow companies and these online forums for growers and that kind of thing are starting to collect data and that kind of thing, but I don't know how it's been aggregated yet.
Instead of calling it Airbnb, we'll call it ground button. Any other questions? That was a bad one. Got a question there. So, question about, you know, when the levy breaks in July here, how are these companies going to get to their consumers?
I was glad that there was a presentation on social media and that kind of thing, because one point I wanted to mention, I forgot to, was the opportunity that exists for advertising. Because I think as a cannabis business, and even as an ancillary product company, we've been kicked off social media, payment processors, all of these kind of things. And each of these is an opportunity, right, for a business to come in, because I'd be dying for a business to come and say, hey, I have, 100,000 targeted customers that I can reach, for however we can reach them, So that certainly is a challenge. There are also restrictions within the law about where cannabis businesses that actually touch the plant can advertise, and there's a requirement that 85% of that audience be adults over 21, and how you determine that remains to be seen. But again, challenges, regulatory restrictions around advertising, and so certainly any way that you can connect that consumer with the business is,
use LinkedIn and you'll know they'll be over 21. Another question? Question right here.
So I think that
So
remains.
wait, let me repeat the question. So the question's about, will there be data collected at point of sale and be available?
So yes, data will be collected. How much of that data will be available still remains to be seen. I think that one of the only recommendation that was immediately taken up by the Cannabis Control Commission today was to immediately put out for public bid seed to sale tracking contract again. And I think that depending on who shows up for that, and depending on what type of functionality they have available, I think that that probably will be a main driver, because again, you're looking at the Cannabis Control Commission having limited resources and budget. So I think that, again, that's just another opportunity of a company being able to provide a basic service and then having the innovation and technology to do, additional things. But I think there is a call, if that is available, I know that that's of interest to people, and certainly of interest when we're thinking about ensuring inclusion and access and having the data to support that.
A lot of questions online, and you can tell who's online, is about, is big pharma going to move in, or are the big growers going to move in? And I think we've already answered that. The reality is yes. I mean, if it becomes big business, I mean, the only reason they're all sitting on the sidelines is because of the lack of federal, regulations, right?
And there are biotech companies right now. So cannabis biotech right now kind of means, like I think I mentioned, like people who are isolating one compound and have gone through clinical trials and are about to go to consumer, or making synthetic cannabinoids.
Questions? Wait a second, I'm going to come back to you. How about this gentleman? Okay, so the question is really about, is it still Cheech and Chong, or is the culture evolving to more of a medicinal culture, if we may call it that?
At this pharmaceutical company yesterday, it was not a big deal. We just talked about it openly, and it was, it's money.
Well, I mean, we have,
So,
plus there's an opioid crisis happening in this country where we've allowed legal distribution of drugs that we've known for 100 years are highly addictive, whereas we've known for a long time through the ethnobotanists that this is not addictive, right? So that's interesting. So I guess there's going to be culture shifts, but it's about money. Yes. Can you use U.S. mail to mail? I know the answer to that. No.
No. Hard no.
You can't cross borders. So, James is here, and he followed the path with his company, with his vape company, to import it from China, and Customs Border Patrol said no. The Goodwin Procter was the law firm, and so it's can't cross borders, right? Yep.
If I could circle back to the question you asked about the cultural shift, I think it's really important for people who are cannabis users and successful, and to come out and to show that you can use cannabis and still get stuff done. There isn't this negative stigma there. I actually use cannabis to help me get stuff done. So there's a shift there, and
I've been fighting my kids on that forever.
And as a member of the LGBTQ community, another thing is that when we started to actually show ourselves, that's when the shift happened. So you kind of have to come out with cannabis if you use it, and to be a little bit more proud to say that, yes, I'm a responsible cannabis user. And people start to kind of see that it's not a big deal anymore, and that's where I think the cultural shift will happen the most.
So we'll start seeing these ads at 7 o'clock, like with all the other pharma ads. Yes. Great question.
Even out of that one.
This is the big money question, right? So in the entire supply chain, where would you put your money today? Rich?
Where would I put my money?
Yeah.
Um,
Or his money.
or his money.
It's like when the internet started, right? It went in waves. So what's the wave today?
I think I have two answers to that. And I think the first one is I would put my money behind something that's going to be a large brand, right? Because that's what I was sort of alluding to in my 5 minutes up there was the companies that get the money today are going to be able to really move forward quickly. And there is no winner yet. You know, we're still at VHS or beta, and there is no national brands really. There's a handful of ones that are state to state, but there's no Coke or Pepsi.
Actually, I think he means Tylenol and aspirin.
Do you think that the brands are going to have the entire food chain?
Depend.
I think it depends.
I don't think so.
And the other part of what I wanted to say was I think in my mind, the area of this ecosystem that needs the most work is applying consistency. That's the single biggest thing that it's dangerous to have completely inconsistent plants. And one of the things that I always like to say in conversation is, look, Blue Dream isn't Blue Dream isn't Blue Dream. It's just not. It doesn't matter if you grow it in Washington or Oregon or Colorado. It's different everywhere, and that needs to change.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the slides I was going to show was a report done by Deloitte in Canada, and they went out and surveyed consumers, and 25% of consumers said they want to buy it through their pharmacy, and it's for this reason. People see it as something they're putting into their body, and they want dose management, control, substance control, and those kind of things. So track and trace, great place to be in. Yeah. Bob? Welcome to you.
From everybody.
So interesting. So I think the comment here is there's already an opportunity to pick up failing assets. So that's another opportunity. There was somebody else. Actually, you've had your hand. Go. I'll get you next. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. This is a problem in a lot of medicinal plants. We call it synergism, which a lot of scientists think that's a cop-out. Just because you don't understand what it is, you just call it the entourage effect or synergism. And it kind of is, because you can investigate some of those things. You can start adding back compounds and seeing if the effect increases, for instance. But this same question goes back to the reproducibility. So 25% of the consumers, you said, want that reproducibility. They want to go to a pharmacist, right? So that 25% of the market, through what I mentioned, cell and tissue culture, we can grow cells of the plant which will produce not just one compound. They can produce a synergistic matrix of compounds. I've done this with like the Madagascar periwinkle, a well-studied plant. Under controlled conditions, on the 28th day of every month, we can harvest those cells, extract a matrix of compounds. We can elicit them with hormones. We can do all types of things, which doesn't just make one compound. It makes that synergistic matrix. So
We don't just have to do it with plants. I mean, we can engineer yeast to generate.
Right, so and a lot of that's being done for like protein drugs. We're at the very infant stages of producing, you know, if you have 30 or 40 biosynthetic steps to get an opioid or something, or a cannabinoid, we're just starting to figure those out, and then you have to put them into another organism. So we're just figuring those things out. So using the plant cell themselves can be an option as well, because all the steps are already there.
Yeah. So I've been mentoring this 25-year-old kid from Montreal who's got a synthetic biology company that is sort of replicating this cannabinoid. So you had a question.
Yeah, so while we're talking about consistency and quality, is there any trend in consumption, you know, from smoking to candies? I mean, you know, where is that actually going?
Right.
There's only a certain amount of places you can smoke.
Right. So the question's about consumption behavior of cannabis in all its forms.
I actually had a slide on that like I didn't really talk to, but we're seeing in like conveniency is huge. Like people like consuming products that they can rip it open and use it immediately. And with the High Times Cup in Michigan this year, every single product that won like a best new product was a pre-roll. We are seeing concentrates drastically increasing, like the vape pens that you're seeing everyone with. They're, you know, you can use them anywhere. They're odorless. They're way more discreet. You can really tailor them based on effects with using different terpene profiles. And like the rise in those is pretty substantial. I want to say pre-rolls and concentrates were the two quickest growing, followed by edibles, and then flower is the only one decreasing in terms of market share, although it makes up a little over 50% of the market right now.
I would say absolutely agree on that concentrate aspect too. We have a lot of customers that are activating concentrate and then using that in edibles and making other products with them, and it's a really simple way to do that that allows them to make a lot of different products. We're also seeing a big increase in like dermal use and topical use, especially among the senior segment. Because again, it's a great medicinal purpose use, and it's kind of a easy, dipping your toe into the water of using different products, because it often doesn't lead to a psychoactive effect.
Your skin's like your mouth, though.
Not exactly.
No? The guy back there.
Large companies finally get into this business. Do you think that's going to be led by or driven by pharmaceutical Glaxo or the Budweiser, the beverage industry, or the agribusiness being sold? Who do you suspect is going to be the leaders getting into this medium legislation?
So the question is, what established multinationals are going to crush everybody else? Rich?
We already saw it about 3 weeks ago. Constellation Brands bought 9.9% of Canopy Growth Corp in Canada. Scott's Miracle Grow, under an affiliate called Hawthorne Growth, bought some lights, Gavita, and that was the canary in the coal mine. It's happening. I think it's going to be a variety. It's going to come from a bunch of different angles. I mean, who stands to lose? Pharmaceuticals, tobacco companies, and alcohol. So those are guys who are going to try and get in.
Market share protection. 1 second. I got this guy first. Yeah. No, wait a second. I got this guy first. He had his hand up.
What do you all think about synthetic-based fertilizers and why it's acceptable for people to be using, or companies to be using fertilizers intended specifically for ornamentals on products that people are consuming and costing? I never hear people talk about that.
So. So the question is about synthetic fertilizers and why they're not banned for cannabis.
I mean, we're seeing it in California where they are being pretty strict with what the testing requirements are in terms of pesticides and like approved products. So much as like synthetic versus organic fertilizers hasn't been so much of an issue, as much as more so like specifically toxic pesticides. Like there are quite the list in California of what you can and can't use. And I will say, like, in a place, I want to say it was Oregon, I just saw their labels, they need to put every single thing that goes into the plant on the actual label that goes out at retail. So you're seeing things like mealworms and guano, and like, you know, it's not necessarily the most appetizing thing as a consumer, but it does kind of like force the companies to at least do a little bit of self-regulation. I don't think anybody wants to see like myclobutanol or something like that on their flowers.
So is this the time where people can make these comments to the Control Commission, or is?
It definitely is the time for that, and I don't have the statute in front of me, but I do think that there are some restrictions on the mass medical side about what fertilizers can be used, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I do believe that there's a restriction on organic fertilizers being used there. We also have really strict testing requirements that are going to be pushed over from the medical to the adult use side that tests for pesticides, heavy metals, and other things like that. But certainly if there's evidence or concern there, it's something to be expressed now, absolutely.
I had a question.
Question was, with technology changing and more knowledge about the cannabis plant becoming relevant, do you think it's possible that what the Revita goal now might be
Yeah, so I think specifically the questions about lighting and how new technologies are coming all the time, and how do people deal with it?
Uvita is definitely still the standard in California. You're seeing people switch over to LEDs and CMH, but more so like HPS in general, like is definitely.
Yeah, I think he's trying to answer it.
No, I'd say like you see people like Fluence on the LED side like really killing it, and they're definitely like starting to take up market share. But when you start to talk about like 20,000 square foot plus facilities in California, you'd be hard pressed to find more than one or two that are doing anything substantial with LED. The CMH is coming on, and like you've seen bigger facilities start to build out with it. LED has more been like towards the veg side of things, and people are really getting like efficient with mixing the different spectrums to maximize their output.
Awesome. Who's the guy back there? Yeah. No, you. Your turn.
Thank you. So given some of like a lot of the emotions that are kind of driving the support markets for this stuff, like transaction banking and all that sort of thing, do you see, kind of a two-part question, do you see an alternative like CRO market emerging? And if it is it going to be a small to medium size servicing, market, or is it going to be solved by the big guys? Or once the gates are open, is all that money going to flow where it's supposed to go, or is there going to be room there for smaller companies doing that sort of
So really, I think the two questions were, one was, since pharma in particular in this case is sitting on the sideline, is there room for contract research organizations to do some of this testing that we're talking about? And once the feds allow it, are they going to be wiped out?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think I can really speak from the business side. Maybe you know more if companies are being poised to do that type of work, but I'm not familiar with any in particular.
Yeah, I know. I mean, if you look at the testing lab space, there are a bunch of great testing labs that set up here in Massachusetts in anticipation of volume, and I think the volume hasn't come yet. But
Right, yeah.
but when the volume comes, will they get consolidated? Probably. I mean, just in the electrical engineering world, there were a whole bunch of testing labs 30 or 40 years ago, and they all got consolidated. So I'm sure the same thing will happen here. Another question? I'm right here. Yeah, so let me rephrase the question a little bit. So the question is there an optimal price at which the black market disappears and it all becomes a white market, I guess? that what it's called? Or do we know that? Do we know from Colorado, for example? Colorado has the most data, right?
I can speak to that from my own personal opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion is that when we allow people to have more access to it, people will choose a regulated market versus non-regulated. And that's because they get safer products, so you don't have to worry about what you're ingesting into your system, and you don't have the stress of trying to figure out how the heck am I going to get this thing without getting nabbed. So my own personal preference is, to go regulated, and the majority of people that I talk to prefer to go that way as well. And I don't really know much about the non-regulated market, but I don't think, and maybe someone else can talk to this, I don't think the prices are that much of a difference where it's a no-brainer to go non-regulated versus regulated. If you can get access to it, and you know it was grown somewhere that's been tested and it's in a lab, people choose that more than non-regulated.
Well, that's not entirely true in the tobacco market. So we
I'm
know
talking
there's a
only talking
large
cannabis.
black market in tobacco products because the prices are so high.
And I would say like a big factor on that is the actual tax rate. Like in Santa Barbara in California, they put in a 20% gross receipts tax. Retailers aren't even applying for licensing in Santa Barbara. Black market delivery services are literally the entire market. As a patient, to go to a store in Santa Barbara is kind of like very irrational, because if you went on the #1 advertising platform, you'd go on Weed Maps, and you would literally look at somebody willing to deliver the exact same products that the licensed retailers are selling to your door for 30 to 40% cheaper. When it's like a 5 or 10% difference, people are picking licensed retailers.
So even if they know one thing is a known entity versus another one that's not known, what Asia was saying.
In California, it's a little nuanced, because both the legal and illegal operators sell the same products from the same brands. There's not enforcement yet, so it's, as a patient, if you go look at a menu of a legal operator or an illegal operator like Kiva, the company I work for,
Right.
we would be on both menus because we're a medical company, Prop 215.
Right.
As this goes more recreational, that'll change, but until...
So the retailers have a front door and they have a back door?
Something like that.
Were you going to say something?
I was going to say that this is always a challenge, right, about taxing the underlying product. And when the legislature was making the changes here in Massachusetts and starting to raise those taxes, that was the argument against raising them, because you want a product that is going to be competitive. But I think that Asia hit one of the biggest points, which is access. When you have adult use coming on board, you have a whole new set of consumers coming on board. And as somebody who knows a lot about the unregulated market, it's not the easiest thing to access, even if you have connections within that. So at times. So I think that having a familiar space, having a safe space, especially for people who may have not really have a lot of familiarity with cannabis, is absolutely key. And then also, I think this underscores the importance of providing pathways for people that are on the unregulated market to become a part of the regulated market, because again, that's how you begin to stamp out and stifle an unregulated market, by creating a very attractive legal market.
Awesome. So one question here.
So actually, I wanted to just address this gentleman here that asked the question about where's the place to be able to live. And I love that question because I asked myself the exact same question. And so in my opinion, I had to look at, was there any sort of analog that already existed, right? And what I came up with was oil and gas. Oil and gas is, to me, is the closest analog to what we're talking about here. And in the sense that there is a upstream, midstream, and downstream. And so if you look at the panel here, you can, Tom's upstream, Rusty, I think, is midstream, your distribution. Age is upstream, and Chanel is a little weird because she's disintermediated all of it. She actually is probably upstream.
And
And so, just as in a level of abstraction, I thought about where the best chance for success was, and that's why we started a company that is at the source. We are as far upstream as you can get, because like oil and gas, that's where the that's who controls most of the interest. We may go vertically integrated
So following that metaphor, not quite the oil and gas, but the upstream metaphor, it really means go up to the mountains. Or down to the well. So I'm going to take the last question online because I think we're cutting off at 8, correct? Yeah. So last question online. How does one go about getting a license or a permit to distribute on the small level in Massachusetts? Are there any other opportunities for licenses, or is it done?
So they keep a close eye on what's happening over these next couple of months and go to that Cannabis Control Commission website and listen to the public arguments that are happening, and then there'll be draft regulations coming out in January. After the draft regulations come out, there'll be a brief comment period where, again, if the regulations don't include what we need them to include or need to be adjusted, that's when people can come forward, and our subcommittees or our advisory board will also be part of that process of giving additional recommendations at that point, and then looking out in April and starting to build your team. If you have, this is for online, so if you have a concept or an idea, you need to start looking at financing and your team, but there will be opportunities for licenses, and it's just a matter of waiting for the final regulations to come out.
So there's still plenty of opportunity. It's still the Wild West. I think that's kind of the takeaway. And I hope this has been a useful panel. Please thank the panel.
And thank you to Vinod as well. Great discussion, great questions, everyone. We can continue the discussion upstairs. We're having a reception in the 4th floor at the R&D Pub. So if you go out the auditorium, take a right, there's a bunch of elevators up to the 4th floor. You can follow the crowd and continue questioning our panel. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Excellent.